The golden light of Boston Harbor rippled through the restaurant's glass walls, casting slow-moving reflections across the marble floor. Harbor and Pine wasn't just expensive, it was curated like a gallery of power. Every table was occupied by someone whose last name could move markets. And among them, Izzy Reyes, Izzy to the few who knew her, moved quietly, the kind of quiet that came from learning to disappear. Her black uniform fit like a shadow, her hair pinned with precision, her smile practiced, but never quite reaching her eyes. For 2 years, she'd perfected invisibility, floating through conversations about yachts and dividends, never once allowing a glimpse of the woman she used to be. "Table 6 needs another bottle of the Sancerre," Dana, the floor manager, whispered. "And for God's sake, Izzy, try not to spill it. The Mercer family's back in town." Izzy nodded, tightening her grip on the tray. The name hit her like static. Mercer. She'd read it before. Articles about billion-dollar acquisitions, interviews about ethics and finance. Julian Mercer, the kind of man who could make or break entire industries with a single call. She steadied herself. Just another customer, just another night. When she reached table 6, the woman seated nearest the window caught her attention first. Silver hair pulled back into a soft knot, pearls, posture like she'd been born in boardrooms. But it was her hands that Izzy noticed. The subtle movements, graceful, deliberate, signing. The woman's lips moved, but no sound followed. Izzy froze. Most servers smiled politely and pretended not to notice. But something inside her refused to ignore that language. Without thinking, Izzy set the bottle gently on the table and began to sign back. "Good evening. How are you tonight?" The woman's face lit up in surprise and pure delight. Her fingers moved in a flutter of graceful motion. "You sign? How wonderful. I was trying to ask for more water." "Of course, ma'am." Izzy smiled, signing as naturally as breathing. "I'll take care of that right away." For a moment, everything else in the restaurant blurred. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the orchestral hum of privilege. Only this small human connection existed. When Izzy returned with the carafe, the woman signed again. "It's rare to meet someone here who speaks my language. May I ask where you learned?" Izzy hesitated, her heart skipping. "From university," she almost said. "From Harvard, during my linguistics minor." But the words caught in her throat. "My grandmother was deaf," she signed instead. "I learned for her." "Beautiful." The woman smiled, warm and genuine. People forget communication isn't only words. "Mother," came a deep voice from behind Izzy. "You've been waving your hands for 2 minutes. What?" He stopped mid-sentence. Izzy turned and found herself staring straight into the gray eyes of Julian Mercer. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered. Every detail of him screamed precision. The dark navy suit, the discreet watch, the clean line of his jaw. His gaze carried the same composure as his empire, steady, calculated, dangerous in its intelligence. Izzy's pulse tripped over itself. Your mother was asking for water." "Yes, I gathered," Julian said. His voice was low, controlled, but his expression, it wasn't dismissive, it was curious. He studied her the way some people study stock charts, searching for anomalies. "You know sign language?" Izzy nodded. "A little." That wasn't a little. His tone wasn't accusatory, but it carried weight, like he was cataloging her. Elena Mercer, his mother, intervened with a smile, signing quickly. "She's wonderful. You should be nicer to her." Julian's eyebrow lifted. "And what did she just say?" Izzy hesitated, lips curving slightly. "She said you're very kind." Elena laughed silently, covering her mouth, while Julian caught the flicker of mischief in both women's eyes. For a man who dealt in logic, it was a rare moment of being outnumbered. He exhaled, faintly amused. "My mother's been trying to embarrass me since 1987. Seems she's found an accomplice." Izzy didn't answer. She felt the weight of his gaze and the heat rising in her chest. Her job was to serve, not to be noticed. And yet, for the first time in 2 years, someone was actually looking. She excused herself quickly, signing a polite goodbye to Elena, who touched her wrist gently, a small human thank you that felt too warm for the sterile air of Harbor and Pine. But as Izzy turned to leave, Julian's voice followed. "Wait." She froze. He gestured toward the wine bottle still in her hand. "You forgot the cork. That's a 2015 Domaine Michelob Merceau, isn't it?" Izzy blinked. Few customers knew that level of detail. "Yes, sir. Excellent memory. His eyes narrowed slightly. You pronounced it correctly. I'm sorry? Most servers don't. They call it merzeult. You said it the way the vintners do. You've studied French? Izzy's breath caught. Just phrases from the menu. He tilted his head, unconvinced. Right. Elena was watching them both, her smile knowing. She signed something quietly to her son. Julian sighed. My mother says you're interesting. Izzy smiled faintly. I think she's just being kind. She's not. Trust me, she doesn't do kind out of politeness. The air between them shifted. Light, but charged. For a second, Izzy forgot she was wearing an apron, forgot the tray, forgot the rule that said never engage too long with the powerful. Then Dana's voice sliced through the moment. Izzy, table 3. The spell broke. Excuse me, Izzy said quickly, retreating toward the bar, but she could still feel Julian Mercer's eyes following her, steady, curious, calculating. Behind her, Elena signed something softly to her son. You like her. Julian shook his head, though a corner of his mouth lifted. She's not like the others. Elena's fingers moved again. Then don't treat her like the others. Julian didn't answer. He simply watched Izzy weave between the tables, graceful and detached, as if she belonged to another world entirely. Later that night, as she refilled a glass near the window, Izzy caught her reflection against the harbor lights. Faint, almost ghostly. She'd built her life on the ability to fade, but for the first time, someone had looked hard enough to see the outline, and that terrified her more than anything. Because people who looked too closely always found the truth, and the truth was something Izzy Reyes could never afford to have discovered again. The night outside the harbor had turned to liquid gold. Through the glass walls of Harbor and Pine, the waves shimmered with light from the docked yachts, rising and falling like shallow breaths. Inside, laughter hummed from every corner, but at table 6, time had slowed. Izzy had hoped to vanish again, to melt back into the rhythm of refills and polite smiles. But before she could disappear, she heard his voice, low, calm, and impossible to ignore. Miss Reyes, Julian said. The sound of her last name in his voice startled her. Most guests never bothered to remember it. She turned, tray balanced, eyes steady. Yes, sir? Julian Mercer rose from his chair, not abruptly, but with a smooth authority that made even the air seem to pause. A moment, please. There was no malice in his tone, but it carried the quiet command of someone used to being obeyed. Izzy nodded, pretending composure. Of course. As she approached, Elena Mercer, his mother, lifted her hands in sign. The corners of her eyes sparkled with humor. He's working too much, she signed to Izzy. My son needs to meet someone interesting for once, someone who doesn't talk about stock portfolios. Izzy bit back a laugh, covering it with a polite smile. Your mother has quite the sense of humor, she said softly. Julian's eyes flicked to his mother, who gave him an innocent look. What did she say? Izzy hesitated, then offered a diplomatic answer. She said you should take more breaks. I doubt that's all, Julian murmured. Elena only smirked, folding her hands as if to say, I'm not translating myself. Julian motioned toward the empty chair beside him. Sit. I'm working, Izzy replied quickly. Then consider this part of your job, he said. You've intrigued my mother, and now you've intrigued me. There was nothing flirtatious in his tone. It was worse. It was clinical, analytical, like he was dissecting a mystery that refused to fit into his pattern of logic. Izzy's pulse thudded. I really shouldn't... Please, Elena interrupted in a gentle but firm sign. Sit with us, just for a minute. Izzy hesitated, caught between manners and instinct. Every alarm in her mind told her to stay invisible, but Elena's expression was kind, and Julian's gaze left no room for retreat. She sat. For a long, silent beat, the world shrank to the 3 of them. The billionaire, his mother, and the waitress who wasn't supposed to exist in their orbit. Julian leaned slightly forward, studying her like a negotiation. You're not from here. I live in Boston, Izzy said, keeping her tone neutral. That's not what I asked. She met his eyes. Then you'll have to be more specific, Mr. Mercer. He almost smiled. Almost. Fair enough. Let's start simple. How many languages do you speak? Izzy blinked. I don't... You signed fluently, Julian interrupted, not like someone who learned from a YouTube video. And earlier you pronounced Mercer the way only a native French speaker would. So English, French, and ASL. Anything else? Her chest tightened. Just English. He tilted his head slightly, unconvinced. Harvard or MIT? The words hit her like a punch. What? She whispered. Which one? He said calmly. You carry yourself like someone who's been through Ivy League wars. Someone who's learned to hold her breath in boardrooms, not kitchens. Izzy's throat closed. She forced a small laugh. I'm just good at reading people. No, Julian said softly, leaning closer. You're good at hiding from them. The space between them shrank. The candlelight caught in his gray eyes, turning them silver. Izzy gripped the edge of her apron to keep her hands steady. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Because I don't like coincidences, he replied, and tonight feels like one. Behind him, Elena watched them both with an expression that was less curiosity and more recognition, like she saw something unfolding that neither of them fully understood yet. Izzy stood abruptly. I should get back to work. Julian reached out, not roughly, but enough to stop her movement. His hand closed lightly around her wrist. The contact jolted through her like an electric current. He noticed it too, the slight tightening of her pulse beneath his fingers, the sharp intake of breath. His eyes softened, the steel giving way to something more human. I'm sorry, he said quietly, releasing her. That was uncalled for. Izzy took a step back, reclaiming her composure. You're not the first person to be curious, Mr. Mercer, but I'm afraid I'm not nearly as interesting as you think. I doubt that, he said. People who aren't interesting don't spend their nights trying to disappear. The words landed too close to the truth. Elena signed something again, slower this time, as if she wanted Izzy to feel every syllable. You have kind eyes. The world is loud, but kindness speaks loudest. Izzy swallowed hard. Your mother is very kind. Julian translated her words aloud. She says you have kind eyes. I do? Izzy asked, her voice trembling between laughter and disbelief. She's never wrong, Julian replied. Izzy looked at him then, really looked, and for a fleeting second, she saw not the billionaire who could destroy worlds with his signature, but the son of a woman who still made him blush. And then she remembered why she'd spent 2 years building walls. She straightened. I should check on the other tables. Of course, Julian said, though something in his voice suggested he wasn't finished. Miss Reyes, thank you for taking care of my mother. It's my job, she said softly. He nodded. Yes, but you do it like it means something. She didn't answer. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her again. And for the first time in years, she hated being seen. Not because it hurt, but because part of her wanted to look back. When she disappeared behind the curtain separating the dining hall from the service corridor, she pressed a hand against her chest, steadying her breath. Harvard or MIT? He couldn't know. He couldn't possibly know. Dana's voice cut through her panic. Izzy, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, she lied. Just tired. Well, pull yourself together. That guy at 6, he's not just rich. He's Mercer rich. Izzy forced a shaky smile. I noticed. Back at table 6, Elena Mercer watched the door where Izzy had vanished. Her hands moved in the soft rhythm of sign. You like her? She teased. Julian stared at his untouched glass of wine. She's complicated. Elena smiled knowingly. Complicated is just another word for real. Outside, the harbor waves tapped gently against the docks, as if echoing a promise neither of them understood yet, that nothing truly hidden stays invisible forever. The city had already gone quiet by the time Izzy walked home. Boston after midnight was a different world, its glass towers asleep, its harbor lights fading into a thin mist. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, the smell of salt and rain clinging to her hair. Her shift had ended hours ago, but the weight of the evening hadn't lifted. Julian Mercer's eyes followed her, even now, through reflections in shop windows, in the rhythm of her own footsteps. The apartment sat above a laundromat near South Station, where the hum of dryers worked like a lullaby for the sleepless. One small room, a kitchenette the size of a closet, and a single narrow window overlooking the alley. It wasn't much, but it was safe, or at least it had been. Izzy locked the door twice, out of habit more than fear, and kicked off her shoes. She hung her black uniform on the back of a chair, staring at it like it belonged to someone else. The girl who wore that uniform was invisible. The woman beneath it couldn't afford to be seen. She knelt beside the bed, lifted the loose floorboard, and pulled out a metal box. It was dented, the lock scratched, but it still opened with a single turn of a key she kept on a chain around her neck. Inside lay fragments of a life she no longer claimed. A crimson Harvard MBA diploma, edges worn soft from being touched too often. A leather-bound notebook filled with equations and notes. The early drafts of an algorithm that had once promised to change the world of investment risk modeling. And finally, the incorporation papers for a company called Quantum Bridge Capital, her name once listed under co-founder and chief analytics officer, now crossed out in thick black ink. Izzy traced the line that had erased her. Clean, efficient, final. The same way Victor had erased her from every database, every contract, every article that had once mentioned her. Her phone buzzed, slicing through the silence. A number she didn't recognize. Unknown. "Hope you don't mind. I got your number from HR. My mother wanted to thank you for being so kind tonight. She hasn't stopped talking about you." Izzy's stomach tightened. Julian, of course it was. The kind of man who never asked for permission, who assumed boundaries were flexible if intention seemed polite. She reread the message 3 times. The words weren't threatening. They were warm, even charming, but something about them pried open an old door inside her chest, one she'd locked and sealed with years of fear. It was exactly how Victor had started, a casual message, a gentle tone, a compliment disguised as gratitude. "You have a rare mind, Izzy," Victor had once said, standing beside her after a late-night strategy session. "You see numbers like music." She had believed him. She had trusted him. And he had taken everything. Her breath grew shallow. She typed back a response, polite and distant. "That's very kind of her. Please tell your mother I'm glad she enjoyed the evening." Then she deleted it, rewrote it, deleted it again. Finally, she turned off the phone and tossed it onto the bed. No replies, no engagement, no new mistakes. She reminded herself of the rules that had kept her alive this long. Don't stand out, don't get close, and never ever let another man make you believe you matter. Izzy moved to the small kitchenette, poured water into a chipped mug, and sat at the table. The city hummed faintly through the window, a distant train horn, a car door, a siren that faded too quickly. She opened her laptop, its surface dull and scratched from years of use. The glow painted her face in pale light. For a second, she hovered over the search bar, tempted to type Julian Mercer profile, to find out who exactly she had spoken to tonight, but she stopped herself. Curiosity was how Victor had found her weakness before, through kindness, through attention, through the illusion that someone finally saw her brilliance. Now, invisibility was survival. And yet, her heart wouldn't obey. She could still hear the way Julian had said her name, quietly but with intention, like he was testing how it fit on his tongue, not as a servant's title, but as if she were an equal. No one had said her name that way since before the ruin. Izzy closed the laptop, forcing her mind away from it, and her gaze landed on an old photograph she kept turned face down beside the bed. Her hand trembled as she flipped it over. The image stared back at her, Victor Lau and herself, standing in front of Quantum Bridge's first office in Cambridge. She was laughing, sunlight on her face, holding a coffee cup he'd bought her on their first morning as partners. Victor's arm was around her shoulders. His smile looked genuine. She remembered believing it was. Izzy flipped the picture back down, pressing her palm flat against the table. The past had a way of crawling back through cracks you thought were sealed. She whispered to the empty room, "Not again." The apartment felt colder, or maybe that was just her body remembering what fear felt like. Her phone buzzed once more. She didn't pick it up. The screen lit the darkness, showing the same number again, and this time a shorter message. "Julian, it's late. I shouldn't have texted. My apologies. Sleep well, Miss Reyes." A simple courtesy, nothing more, nothing less. Still, her pulse refused to slow. She let the phone dim back to black, sat in silence, and whispered a truth she hated admitting even to herself. "I don't know if I'm more afraid of him, or of what it means that I don't want him to stop." Her reflection in the dark window stared back, a faint outline, blurred by condensation, a ghost of the woman she used to be. Izzy Reyes, the name she once carried with pride, now existed only inside a hidden box under her bed. The woman the world saw was a waitress, nameless and safe. But as the first light of dawn began to seep through the window, she felt a small, dangerous spark inside her chest. The kind that whispered of unfinished business. The kind that could either rebuild her life or destroy it all over again. Morning light crept through the blinds, cutting pale stripes across the table where Izzy's laptop sat open. The hum of the laundromat below buzzed faintly through the floorboards. a monotonous rhythm that almost drowned out the sound of her heart pounding. She hadn't slept, not really. She had spent most of the night staring at the black screen of her phone, waiting for it to light up again, half hoping it would, and half praying it wouldn't. When the silence became unbearable, she opened her laptop. The screen flickered once, the fan wheezed, and the old machine came to life, just as stubbornly as she had. She wasn't searching for Julian Mercer, not at first. She just wanted to know more about the world she'd stumbled into again, the world she had fought to escape. But one headline changed everything. Mercer Holdings in advanced talks to acquire Quantum Bridge Capital. The blood drained from her face. She clicked the link with trembling fingers. An image filled the screen. Julian Mercer and Victor Lau shaking hands at an investment summit in Manhattan, both in dark suits, both smiling for the cameras. Julian looked composed, confident. Victor looked triumphant. The caption below might as well have been a death sentence. Strategic merger expected to redefine global fintech. Izzy's reflection stared back from the laptop screen, pale, ghost-like, framed by that same photograph of the man who had destroyed her life, standing beside the only person who had seen her as human in years. Her breath came shallow. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." It couldn't be coincidence. She scrolled through the article, reading every line twice. Mercer Holdings to acquire controlling stake in Quantum Bridge Capital. Victor Lau to remain as CEO following integration. Sources confirm final negotiations to take place within the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That was all the time she had before the two men's worlds, her past and her present, collided completely. If Julian started digging into Quantum Bridge's internal operations during due diligence, he'd find traces of her. Not her name. Victor had been too thorough for that. But the algorithm, the patterns, the linguistic structure of the code that bore her fingerprint. And if Victor realized she was still alive, still close enough to expose him, he wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Izzy's fingers hovered above the keyboard. Her mind raced. There were only 2 options. Option 1, disappear again. Change her name, dye her hair, burn what was left of her old documents. Start over for the 3rd time. A new city, another low-paying job, another life lived in whispers and half-truths. Option 2, stop running, confront the ghosts herself before the walls closed in. Her stomach turned at the thought. The first time she'd run, it had been survival. The second time, it had been punishment. But this would be surrender. And Izzy Reyes had already lost too much of herself to fear. She closed the article and sat back, staring at the cracks in her ceiling. Victor Lau, Julian Mercer, the man who ruined her, the man who could destroy her again, without even meaning to. And between them stood the fragile illusion she'd built. A waitress named Izzy who smiled politely and spoke only when spoken to. She pressed her palms over her face, whispering, "Think." She imagined Victor's voice, smooth, deliberate, always just shy of cruel. "You're too emotional for this business, Izzy. Numbers don't care about feelings." She had believed that once, that numbers were safe, that logic couldn't betray her, but now even algorithms carried ghosts. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting. Izzy opened a new tab and searched Mercer Holdings' Boston office address. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't let Julian walk into that merger blind, not when Victor would twist it into another empire built on her stolen work. But she also couldn't reveal herself without risking exposure. Maybe there was a third option. Maybe she could warn him anonymously. She found Mercer Holdings' public contact page, fingers hesitating above the message box. What could she even say? Don't trust Victor Lau. He's a fraud. It would sound like a jealous ex-employee or a competitor. She deleted the draft before typing a word. The image of their handshake burned in her mind. Julian's confident expression. Victor's charming, calculated grin. Izzy whispered to herself, "You have no idea who you're shaking hands with." Her phone buzzed. The same unknown number. Julian again. "Julian, my mother keeps talking about you. She says she hasn't seen me smile like that in years. I think she's planning to adopt you." A faint laugh escaped her lips before she caught herself. The timing was cruel. He sent another message a moment later. "Julian, are you working tonight?" "I'd like to stop by, purely for the food, of course." Izzy stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The man texting her had no idea that in less than 2 weeks, he'd be sitting across from her worst nightmare. She typed, then deleted, then typed again. "I have a shift, yes, but maybe you shouldn't come." She stared at the sentence until her vision blurred. It sounded ridiculous. It sounded like fear. She erased it all and locked the phone. Her mind was spinning now, images of Victor laughing as she packed her things, of the courtroom where her name had been quietly erased from the company registry, of the empty promises he'd whispered in her ear before turning her into a ghost. And now, the same man was smiling beside Julian Mercer, the one person she'd allowed herself to notice, even for a heartbeat. Fate had an impeccable sense of irony. Izzy rose from the table and crossed to the window. The harbor was faintly visible in the distance, the dawn sky stained with silver. She rested her forehead against the cold glass. "You can't keep running," she whispered. "Not forever." Then she laughed softly, bitterly, but maybe just once more. Her reflection in the glass looked older than 26, tired, but behind the exhaustion was something else, resolve. If she ran again, she would vanish completely. If she stayed, she'd have to face Victor and everything he'd stolen. Either way, the waitress named Izzy was running out of places to hide. The wind that morning carried the first bite of autumn, cool enough to sting, soft enough to remember. Harvard Yard was alive with motion. Students rushing between lectures, the distant echo of bicycle bells, the rustle of leaves across the cobblestones. Izzy stood at the base of Widener Library, clutching a coffee she hadn't tasted, trying to calm the shaking in her hands. She hadn't walked these steps in years. To anyone else, it was just another morning at the university. To her, it was the place she'd built her dreams, and the same place she'd watched them collapse. She almost turned to leave when she saw him. Julian Mercer, standing halfway up the steps, a coffee cup in each hand, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He looked nothing like the man from the restaurant, the billionaire behind a mahogany table. Here, in the gray daylight, he looked younger, human even. "You came," he said, offering her one of the cups. "I almost didn't. I figured." His smile was brief, almost self-deprecating. "But I'm glad you did." She took the cup, more for something to hold than to drink. "Why here?" He looked up at the massive columns behind them. "You told my mother you studied linguistics," he said. "I thought maybe we could start from a place that feels familiar." Izzy's heart skipped. He had remembered. "Harvard's a big place," she said, trying for humor, but failing. "Not big enough to hide in forever," Julian replied. His tone was gentle, not accusing. They sat on the wide stone steps, the space between them deliberate, close enough to talk, far enough to breathe. Students streamed past, laughter spilling into the crisp morning air, oblivious to the quiet storm building between the two strangers on the stairs. Julian broke the silence first. "I did a little research." Izzy's stomach tightened. "On me? On Quantum Bridge," he corrected. "Your old company, I assume?" Her grip on the cup faltered. "Why would you assume that?" "Because I don't believe in coincidences," he said simply. "You speak like someone who built systems, not served them. And because when I mentioned the name Victor Lau at dinner last night, you froze." Izzy's breath hitched. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "Who is he to you?" Julian asked. For a long moment, she couldn't answer. The words stayed locked behind her ribs, like they had for years. But the campus around her, its noise, its life, its familiarity, made her feel something she hadn't in a long time, safe enough to tell the truth, or at least part of it. "Victor Lau was my business partner," she said quietly. "And the man I was supposed to marry?" Julian turned to her, surprised, but didn't speak. "We started Quantum Bridge together," she continued. "We built it from nothing. Long nights, bad coffee, and too much ambition. I created the core algorithm, the predictive engine that made it valuable. He handled investors, clients, exposure. We were unstoppable." Her voice trembled. "Until we weren't." Julian's gaze softened. "What happened?" Izzy looked down at the cup in her hands, the heat long gone but still burning her palms. "He erased me," she whispered. "Every line of credit, every document, every piece of evidence that I ever existed in that company. When I tried to fight back, he said I was unstable, accused me of stealing my own work. He had the money, the lawyers, the narrative. I had nothing." The words spilled out faster now, like a dam breaking. "By the time it was over, I couldn't get a job, couldn't rent an apartment without someone whispering that I was a thief. So I disappeared, changed my name, took a job where no one asked questions." She laughed softly, without humor. "And now the universe thinks it's funny to send his new business partner right to my table." Julian didn't respond at first. The only sound between them was the wind chasing leaves down the marble steps. Finally, he said, "I know Victor." Her head snapped up. "We're negotiating the merger," he continued. "Mercer Holdings is acquiring Quantum Bridge." Izzy's coffee went cold in her hand. "Then you're about to make the worst mistake of your life." "I'm starting to realize that," Julian said. His voice carried no defensiveness, only quiet conviction. She stared at him, unsure if she'd heard right. He met her gaze. "If what you're saying is true, then I'm shaking hands with a liar. And I don't make deals with liars." Something in the way he said it, the calm certainty, the lack of disbelief, hit her harder than pity ever could. "You believe me?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "I believe in patterns," he said. "And yours make sense. Victor's don't." Izzy blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. It wasn't gratitude. It was something more dangerous, hope. Julian looked away, toward the students streaming across the yard. "When I was 22, I thought integrity would protect me from people like him. Now I know it just paints a target on your back." He turned back to her. "If he did what you say, I'll find proof." "You can't," she said quickly. "He covered everything. He always does." Julian's expression hardened. "Then we'll uncover it." The word we landed between them, heavier than stone. Izzy shook her head. "You don't understand. If Victor even suspects I'm alive—" "He won't," Julian interrupted. "Not until I want him to." Her breath caught. He stood, adjusting his coat, looking down at her with a strange mix of resolve and empathy. "You said you built that technology," he said. "Then it's time you reclaimed it." She stared up at him, still seated on the steps where her old life had begun. The man standing above her wasn't pitying her. He was inviting her to fight. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you risk your company for someone you barely know?" Julian hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Because you remind me what integrity looks like." The wind lifted a strand of her hair as he turned to leave. "Julian," she called after him. He stopped, half turning. "If he finds out, if he realizes you're helping me, then he'll learn," Julian said evenly, "that some of us don't scare that easily." And with that, he walked down the steps, vanishing into the swirl of golden leaves, leaving Izzy sitting where her past and future had just collided. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure which frightened her more, facing Victor Lau again, or trusting Julian Mercer to walk beside her when she did. Evening fell early over Cambridge. The river shimmered below the glass facade of the building, its surface rippling with reflections of city lights that looked like broken constellations. Julian's temporary office wasn't large, but it radiated quiet authority, the kind of space built not for show, but for thought. Izzy hesitated at the threshold, clutching her coat. The entire floor was empty except for the faint hum of fluorescent light and the slow sweep of the city beyond. Julian gestured toward the window. "Come in. Don't worry. No one else is here. I use this space when I need distance from the noise." She stepped inside carefully, like someone walking into a trap she wasn't sure she wanted to escape. The glass stretched from floor to ceiling, overlooking the Charles River. From here, Boston looked softer, almost kind, but the illusion didn't fool her. She'd learned the hard way that beauty and danger often shared the same view. Julian leaned against the desk, coat folded over one arm. "Coffee?" "I'm fine," she said, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. He studied her for a moment. "You didn't sleep last night." It wasn't a question. Izzy shrugged. "Some of us don't have that luxury." He nodded once, not pressing. "You read the announcement, didn't you?" Her chest tightened. "The merger, yes." He exhaled slowly, eyes lowering to the polished surface of the desk. "I assume you know what that means for you." "I do," she said. "It means if this deal closes, I disappear again, for good this time. Unless," Julian said, "we stop it." The words were so simple, so certain, that for a moment she forgot how to breathe. "You can't just stop a billion-dollar acquisition," she said. He smiled faintly. "Watch me." The silence that followed stretched like glass between them, fragile, reflective, sharp enough to draw blood if handled wrong. Finally, Julian broke it. "Izzy, I need to know the truth, all of it. What Victor took, how he did it, who helped him cover it. If what you told me on the steps is real, then I'm not shaking hands with a visionary. I'm shaking hands with a thief." His tone didn't carry accusation. It carried conviction. Izzy's hands clenched around her coat. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because integrity matters," he said simply. And because I built Mercer Holdings on a promise, one deal, one truth. If I can't stand by that, then everything I've done means nothing. She laughed softly, the sound brittle. Do you even hear yourself? People like Victor don't lose. They rewrite the rules until they win. Then I'll change the game, Julian said, stepping closer. The confidence in his voice scared her more than arrogance ever could. Arrogance was predictable. Conviction could get people killed, metaphorically or worse. You think this is noble, she said quietly, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm starting to, Julian said, which is exactly why I can't look away. He walked toward the window, his reflection merging with the skyline. Victor's been selling me a story, one I wanted to believe, but after meeting you, I can't unsee the cracks. The numbers are clean, but the timing isn't. He filed patents in waves, months after his supposed breakthroughs. I don't trust that kind of symmetry. It's too perfect. Izzy crossed her arms over her chest, a subconscious shield. You sound like you've already made up your mind. I haven't, Julian replied. That's why you're here. She turned away from him, staring at the city lights flickering across the river. You think you're different from him, that your ethics make you immune, but I've seen this before. Someone promises to protect the truth, and when the cost gets too high, they decide I'm expendable. Julian's voice softened. I'm not Victor Lau. Everyone says that, she whispered. He moved closer, but not enough to crowd her. Then let me prove it. I want you to tell me everything, and I'll decide how to act based on facts, not feelings. But I need you to trust that I'm not doing this for curiosity or pity. I'm doing it because it's right. She shook her head, still staring at the water. Do you know what he did with my trust? He turned it into evidence against me. Julian didn't flinch. Then let's make sure no one can ever do that again. For a long moment, only the city breathed around them. Izzy finally faced him, eyes glinting in the low light. You'd risk your company, your reputation, for something that might not even be provable? Julian's expression didn't waver. If the truth costs $1 billion, I'll pay it. The words hit her like a strike to the chest. Not because of their grandness, but because he meant them. She could see it in his eyes, the same way she'd once seen conviction in Victor's. And that was what terrified her most. Don't, she whispered. Don't make me believe you. He frowned. Why not? Because I believed someone once, she said, and he used my faith to destroy everything I built. Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He simply stood there, silent. The city reflected behind him like a halo of fractured glass. Finally, he said, maybe belief isn't the problem. Maybe you just gave it to the wrong person. Izzy turned away again, arms wrapped around herself. That's easy for you to say. You've never had your name erased. I've had my conscience tested, he replied. It's not that different. The quiet between them grew, heavy, charged not with hostility, but with something unspoken, recognition maybe, or the faint outline of trust taking shape. Izzy's voice trembled when she finally spoke. You don't even know me. I know enough, Julian said. Enough to know you're not lying. She stared at him, searching for cracks, but found only certainty. And for the first time in years, Izzy Reyes felt something dangerously close to hope. Small, fragile, and terrifying. Then what happens now? She asked. Julian smiled, faint and tired. Now we start drawing lines between what's profitable and what's right. She nodded slowly, her breath fogging against the glass. And when the lines blur, then we make new ones, he said. Outside, the river moved silently beneath the glow of the city. In the reflection, they stood like two silhouettes, one haunted, one resolute, separated by glass, bound by the truth neither of them could unsee. The city had long fallen silent when Julian unlocked the glass door of his Cambridge office. The air was crisp with early frost, the river outside reflecting ribbons of silver light. He didn't switch on the overhead lamps, just a small desk light, its warm glow pooling across a stack of printed documents and a sleek tablet. Izzy hesitated at the threshold. Are you sure we should be here this late? Julian looked up, the faintest smile touching his mouth. You're worried someone might see us? I'm worried about everything, she admitted, stepping inside. You said you had something to show me. He motioned her closer, tapping the screen. Due diligence reports. I pulled them from the data room Quantum Bridge provided my team. Izzy froze at the company name. You already have access? I'm an investor, Izzy. Victor trusts me. Or at least he thinks he does. Her pulse quickened as Julian swiped to a series of diagrams. Patent portfolios, he explained. 17 total, but 12 of them are critical to the acquisition. All filed within 4 months, all under Victor's name. Every single one labeled developed in-house. He turned the tablet toward her. Does any of this look familiar? At first, she didn't move. Her hands hovered above the glass like it might burn her. Then, slowly, she leaned in. The screen came alive with diagrams, lines, equations, and color-coded branches that unfolded like a living organism. Izzy's breath hitched. Oh my God. Julian studied her reaction. You recognize it? She nodded, trembling. Not just recognize, it's mine. Her voice was barely audible. This is my predictive algorithm, the core model for volatility mapping. I wrote the first version during my second year of grad school. It took me 2 years to stabilize it. Julian frowned slightly. How can you be sure? Look at the annotations, she said, pointing. See that note? Viva correction to be verified later. That's my shorthand. I left that placeholder in every test version. I never had time to fix it before the merger proposals. He scrolled through another file. The same comment appeared, word for word, across multiple diagrams. Izzy swallowed hard. Victor didn't even bother to change my mistakes. The realization hit her like a blow. The arrogance of it, the carelessness. Julian didn't speak. He was watching her, not the tablet, the way her fingers trembled, the way her shoulders tensed, as if bracing against something invisible. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with anger and disbelief. He didn't just steal my work, Julian. He erased me from it. Julian's jaw tightened. And now he's trying to sell it to me. She nodded bitterly. That's how he operates. He steals something pure, scrubs off the fingerprints, and then makes it shine. By the time anyone realizes, it's too late. The courts, the investors, the press, they all see a genius. Julian exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. I've met plenty of opportunists, but this is something else. He flipped through more documents, each more damning than the last. Patent filings, cross-licensing proposals, even letters of endorsement from venture partners, all bearing Victor's signature and her stolen code. Tell me something, Julian said quietly. If I hadn't shown you these, would you have ever come forward? Izzy hesitated. No. Why? Because no one ever believes the ghost in the story, she said softly. Once your name is erased, the truth stops mattering. The words sank into the room like a confession too heavy for air. Julian placed the tablet on the desk and folded his arms, eyes fixed on the flickering light from the river. He didn't just steal from you, he stole proof. The patents, the metadata, the timeline. They're designed to make his theft invisible. It's not invisible to me, she said. No, Julian agreed. But to everyone else, it's clean, and that's the danger. Izzy turned toward him, confused. What do you mean? He met her gaze. This isn't just theft, it's laundering. Intellectual laundering. He didn't take your idea to use it. He took it to bury its origin, to make sure that no matter how far it spreads, the world will only ever see his name. Izzy's throat went dry. So, if you buy Quantum Bridge, I'd be legitimizing stolen property, Julian finished. I'd become complicit. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. And I won't do that. The certainty in his voice startled her. Most people hesitated when money was involved. He didn't. You'd walk away from the deal? She asked. If the cost of profit is conscience, yes, Julian said simply. Izzy wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that someone in power could still choose what was right. But she had believed before, and belief had been her downfall. She looked back at the tablet. The blue glow illuminated her face, half grief, half fury. That model took me years. Late nights, loan debt, caffeine, hope. I built it to predict risk, not to become one. Julian watched her carefully. We can expose him, she laughed quietly, bitterly. You think truth wins in this world? Victor built his empire on lies. He's not afraid of exposure. He's afraid of silence, of being forgotten. That's why he erased me first. Julian's expression softened. Then maybe it's time he remembers. Their eyes met across the table, hers, weary and skeptical, his, steady and fierce. The air between them thrummed with something unspoken. Not attraction yet, but alignment. Two people standing on opposite sides of a war neither had chosen. Julian broke the silence. I'll bring this to my legal team. Quietly, we'll trace the metadata, the file histories, timestamps. If there's any trace of your authorship left, we'll find it. Izzy shook her head. Victor will notice. He always notices. Then he'll know I'm watching, Julian said. He closed the tablet, and the light disappeared, plunging them both into the dim glow of the desk lamp. For a moment, only their reflections lingered in the glass, two shadows mirrored against the city lights. And in that silence, something shifted. The hunter and the hunted had found each other. The office felt smaller tonight. The hum of the city was distant, muffled behind layers of glass, and yet the silence between them was louder than traffic, louder than anything outside. Izzy stood by the window, her reflection framed by streaks of neon drifting across the Charles. She had been talking for 10 minutes without realizing she'd stopped breathing properly. The words kept spilling, raw and unfiltered. Victor didn't just steal my work, she said finally. He stole the story. Julian looked up from the chair across the desk. The story? She nodded. He told everyone I tried to take the company from him, that I hacked our internal system to move funds, then begged for mercy when he caught me. He said he forgave me, publicly. Her laugh was brittle. Can you imagine that? He made himself the hero of a crime he committed. Julian's jaw tightened. And people believed him. Everyone did, Izzy whispered. Investors, professors, even my own parents. When he played the part of the generous partner who spared me from ruin, there wasn't anything left of me to defend. His forgiveness became proof of my guilt. She turned away from the window, arms folded as if to hold herself together. He said once that people remember the version of the story that makes them feel good, and his version made them feel righteous. Julian's voice was low. That's monstrous. Izzy shrugged. It's business. Something in him snapped. The restraint he had worn like armor since she met him fractured. He pushed back his chair and stood, pacing once before speaking. I spent the last month telling my board that Victor Lau was a visionary, he said, his tone sharper than usual, that he was the kind of mind worth trusting with innovation. And now I realize I was one step away from funding a fraud. That makes me... He stopped, shaking his head. It makes me sick. Izzy studied him, uncertain. You didn't know? I should have, he said. It's my job to know. The quiet returned, heavy and brittle. For the first time, she saw cracks in him. Not the billionaire who negotiated in boardrooms, but a man disgusted with his own blindness. Julian leaned on the desk, both hands gripping the edge. I want to fix this. Izzy flinched. Don't. Don't what? Don't make promises, she said. I've heard them before. They all sound the same when they break. He straightened slowly, his expression softening. You think I'm like him. I think you live in the same world he does, she replied. A world where power buys forgiveness and people like me are just collateral. Julian didn't argue. He walked closer instead, each step deliberate, careful not to spook her. You're wrong about one thing, he said quietly. Power doesn't buy forgiveness. It buys silence. And I'm done being silent. Izzy's pulse raced. She wanted to believe him, but belief was a currency she had already spent and lost. You say that now, she murmured. But when the lawyers call, when the headlines start asking questions, I'll still say it, Julian interrupted, because I'm not afraid of losing face. I'm afraid of losing my soul. The words hit harder than she expected. There was no arrogance in his tone, no calculated sympathy. Just truth, bare and unscripted. Izzy looked away, back toward the river. The city lights bled into the glass, painting her reflection gold and silver. You talk like it's simple, she said. Like all you have to do is tell the truth and the world will clap for you. I know it's not simple, he said. But I also know that doing nothing is worse. She turned to face him fully. You can't fix this for me, Julian. I'm not trying to fix it for you, he said. I'm trying to fix it with you. The distinction hung in the air, fragile but real. Izzy's throat tightened. You don't understand what you're stepping into. Victor doesn't just destroy people. He makes sure no one remembers they existed. Once you stand against him, you don't get to walk away. Julian took another step closer. Maybe that's exactly why I have to. She froze, unsure what terrified her more, his determination or her own reaction to it. He stopped just a few feet away, lowering his voice. I can't undo what he did to you, but I can make sure it never happens again. Not to you, not to anyone else. Her eyes flickered to the floor. That sounds like another promise. Julian hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe it is." He reached out, not with force, not with assumption, and rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. The warmth of his palm broke something in her chest. It wasn't possession. It wasn't pity. It was something quieter. A silent vow. "I'm on your side, Izzy," he said. For a long time, neither of them moved. The city lights outside shimmered through the glass, brushing their faces in shifting patterns of gold. Izzy closed her eyes for one breath, just one. For that single second, she allowed herself to feel the smallest fragment of safety. Then she stepped back, breaking the contact, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't stand too close to me, Julian. I ruin people who try to help." He smiled faintly, sadness flickering through it. "Then let's ruin the right people instead." The air between them trembled with unspoken meaning, trust balanced on the edge of danger. She wanted to argue, to retreat, but the exhaustion in her bones surrendered first. "If you're serious about this," she said, "you need to know what Victor's capable of." Julian's tone steadied. "Then start at the beginning." Izzy nodded slowly, the weight of the past pressing against her lungs. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll tell you everything. Tomorrow." He accepted it with a quiet nod, watching as she turned toward the elevator. As the doors closed between them, Julian stayed where he was, staring at the faint smudge her hand had left on the glass. He didn't wipe it away. Because for the first time in years, he understood what was at stake wasn't just a business empire, it was redemption. And redemption always came with risk. The night skyline of Boston burned behind walls of glass. From the top floor of Mercer Holdings, the harbor lights looked almost gentle, like the city didn't know that inside this room, two men were preparing for war in tailored suits. Julian adjusted his cufflinks, calm on the surface. Across the gleaming table, Victor Lau smiled like a man who already owned the world. "Appreciate you seeing me this late," Victor said smoothly. "I just got back from New York. Investors are impatient. But once we finalize the acquisition, this technology will put Mercer 5 years ahead of any competitor." Julian nodded, his expression unreadable. "You make it sound inevitable." "It is." Victor's grin deepened. "We've built a predictive model that redefines market forecasting, entirely proprietary, developed in-house by a team of PhDs from MIT and Stanford. You'll be buying clean innovation, no disputes, no licensing headaches, no ghosts from the past." That last phrase twisted faintly in Julian's chest, but he didn't let it show. He leaned back in his chair, hands steepled, playing the role of the careful investor. "Clean innovation," he repeated. "That's a rare promise these days." Victor chuckled. "I'm a man of precision. I don't gamble on things I can't verify." Julian almost smiled. The irony could have filled the entire room. Beneath the table, his tablet quietly recorded every word. Mercer's legal department had approved the measure, internal documentation, fully legitimate, but to Julian, it felt like the first strike of something far more personal. "So," he said casually, "walk me through your IP structure. I want to understand what exactly I'm buying." Victor launched into a performance worthy of a stage. 17 patents filed within 4 months, he said, clicking through slides on a large screen, each one backed by clean development records. "We own everything from the core algorithm to the interface layer. No external contributors, no contested claims, no co-founders who might come out of the woodwork later. All airtight." Julian let him talk. The more Victor spoke, the more confident he became. That was his weakness. The man loved his own voice too much to realize the rope tightening around him. "And your team?" Julian asked. "Still the same people from the early phase?" "Mostly," Victor said lightly. "A few faces changed. You know how startups are. Some people can't handle the pace." "Or the ethics," Julian thought, but didn't say. Victor's tone became almost boastful. "We're proud of our clean chain of ownership. Every patent registered under my name and my lead researchers. You'll find no discrepancies in documentation." Julian's pen moved slowly over his notepad. "No one else ever contributed to those patents?" "Not in any legally recognized way," Victor said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Julian caught the phrasing instantly. Legally recognized. Clever. That was how guilty men protected themselves, hide the truth behind a wall of legality. He made a show of reviewing the slides. "This algorithm, it's extraordinary work. I assume your team's ready for integration once the merger is complete?" "Absolutely. The code is stable, fully audited. We've had no external interference." Julian looked up. And you're certain about that? Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the faint edge beneath the question. Of course. Why? Julian smiled faintly. Just doing my due diligence. You'd be surprised how often clean assets come with residue. Victor laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. Not with me. My company is my child, Mr. Mercer. I built it from scratch, and I guard it fiercely. Like a father, Julian said softly. Even when the child wasn't entirely yours. Victor blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me? Julian's expression didn't change. Figure of speech. The meeting went on another 20 minutes. Technical talk, projections, polished confidence. But Julian barely heard it. He was watching Victor's face instead, the micro-hesitations, the too smooth explanations. The man was lying with practiced ease. When the last slide faded, Victor extended a hand. So, we're aligned? Julian shook it. We're aligned, for now. My legal team will review the documents by Friday. Perfect. Victor's smile returned, bright and hollow. I knew you'd see the value. Julian walked him to the elevator, polite, professional. But as the doors closed, Victor's reflection in the glass seemed to flicker, like a mask slipping for half a second before solidifying again. Julian stood alone for a long moment after the elevator disappeared, hands in his pockets, mind racing. Everything Izzy had said was true. Every line, every warning. Victor had built his empire on stolen ground, and he didn't even blink while selling it. Julian turned off the recorder and forwarded the file to his private server. The audio playback confirmed what his gut already knew. Victor's voice filled the quiet office. 17 patents, clean ownership, no co-founders who might come out of the woodwork later. Proof. Enough to build a case or to burn one down. He picked up his phone. The screen glowed with a name that now felt like a lifeline. Julian, you were right. He lied without blinking. He hesitated a moment before typing the last word. Julian, sleep if you can, okay? We'll need strength for what's coming. He hit send, then set the phone down and looked out over the city. The reflection staring back at him in the glass wasn't the calm executive anymore. It was a man preparing to fight a war he hadn't chosen, for someone he barely knew, but already couldn't forget. Somewhere out there, Victor was probably drinking to his own brilliance. And somewhere else, Izzy was trying to believe that trust didn't always end in betrayal. Julian exhaled slowly. He lied without blinking, he whispered to the empty room, repeating the words like a vow. But I won't. The city outside Julian's office was painted in streaks of silver and gold. The skyline mirrored on the river below. Inside, the air felt electric, thick with the kind of tension that came before either brilliance or disaster. Izzy stood by the wall, her arms crossed tightly against her chest as if she could hold herself together by force. The whiteboard beside Julian was covered in scribbles, arrows, timelines, fragments of a plan that seemed impossible. She finally found her voice. You want me to do what? Julian turned from the board, marker still in hand. I want you in the next meeting with Victor. As an independent consultant, someone who specializes in algorithmic architecture. Izzy stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, he said calmly. If we're going to expose him, we have to confront him. Directly. Her laugh came out sharp, hollow. Confront him? Julian, the last time I stood in the same room with Victor Lau, he told me he'd destroy my life if I ever tried to reclaim what was mine. And then he did. Julian set the marker down. That was 2 years ago. He doesn't get to own your fear anymore. You don't understand. Her voice cracked. He threatened to make sure I'd never work again. He said if I showed my face in this industry, he'd call in every favor he had, get me blacklisted, audited, maybe even arrested. He can make things vanish, Julian. People vanish. He moved closer, but not too close. Then it's time someone made him visible again. Izzy shook her head. You think you can walk into that room and out-talk him? He'll twist every word. He always does. Julian's tone stayed steady. He's expecting me to play it safe. That's his mistake. He doesn't expect to see you. Exactly, she said, her voice rising. That's what keeps me alive, being invisible. Julian's eyes softened. And how long can you live like that? The question hung in the air. The hum of the city through the windows filled the silence between them. He took a slow breath and stepped nearer. If you keep running, he wins forever. But if you walk into that room, if he has to look you in the eye and see the person he tried to erase, that's the one thing he can't spin. Izzy's throat tightened. "You're asking me to risk everything." "I'm asking you to take it back," Julian said quietly. "Your name, your work, your dignity." Her knees felt weak, like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. "You make it sound so simple." "It isn't," he said, "but it's necessary." He walked back to the whiteboard, drawing a line between two boxes. "Victor's been controlling the narrative. We flip it. We show him that the ghost he buried has teeth." Izzy let out a shaky laugh. "That's poetic and suicidal." Julian turned, meeting her gaze. "Maybe, but I've learned something about men. Like Victor, they only understand fear when they feel it themselves. Right now, he thinks he's untouchable. You showing up changes that." She bit her lip, pacing the floor. "He'll recognize me instantly. He'll call me a fraud in front of everyone. He'll talk," Julian interrupted, "and every word will dig his own grave. I'll have the meeting recorded, legally, internally. Once he acknowledges you, once he slips up even a little, we'll have him." Izzy looked at him, her eyes wide. "You sound like you've done this before." Julian smiled faintly. "Not exactly, but I've learned how to win against people who think they're gods." She stared at the whiteboard again, where her name, written in black marker, sat beside Victor's under the heading Next Meeting. It looked unreal, like something pulled from a nightmare and pinned to reality. "What if he doesn't slip up?" she asked quietly. Julian's tone softened. "Then we'll still win, because he will have to look at you and realize he failed to erase you." Izzy turned away, pressing her palm to her forehead. "You don't know what it's like, Julian. Every time I think I'm past it, I still hear his voice. I still wake up waiting for another letter, another lawsuit, another reminder that I don't exist." Julian stepped closer until he was beside her, his reflection overlapping hers in the window. "You exist," he said simply, "and you're stronger than the man who tried to convince you otherwise." She met his eyes, searching for doubt, but found none. Just calm certainty, the kind that didn't need to shout to be believed. "You really think I can do this?" she whispered. "I know you can," he said, "and you won't be alone. I'll be right there beside you." Izzy exhaled slowly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. "You have no idea what that promise means." "Then explain it to me," he said. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Maybe after this is over." Julian nodded. "Fair enough." He moved back to his desk, straightening the papers that had been scattered during the discussion. "The meeting's in 2 days. We'll prep tomorrow. I'll handle the logistics. You just need to decide one thing." "What?" "Whether you want to spend the rest of your life hiding or finally step into the light." The words hit her harder than she wanted to admit. For 2 years she had built her safety on shadows, but now, with him looking at her like that, like she was more than what she'd lost, she wondered if safety was just another kind of prison. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, letting the weight of the choice settle. Finally, she opened them. 2 days, she said softly. "Let's do it." Julian's expression eased, but his voice stayed steady. "Good. Then tomorrow, we start preparing. No fear, no lies." Izzy gave a faint, trembling smile. "You make it sound like we're going to war." Julian met her gaze. "We are." He turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from the city filtering through the glass. For a moment, they stood in silence, two silhouettes against the night, each carrying a past too heavy for one person to bear. But this time, they would carry it together. The conference room at Quantum Bridge looked like a cathedral built for money. White light, chrome edges, and a wall of glass overlooking the city. Art pieces hung in precise symmetry, their cold perfection whispering Victor Lau's favorite sermon, success. Julian sat at the far end of the long glass table, composed, unreadable. Beside him, Izzy waited, hands folded, pulse steady only on the surface. Every reflection in the room showed her twice, the woman she used to be and the one who had come to reclaim what was stolen. The door opened. Victor entered with his usual swagger, phone in hand, mid-laugh. "Gentlemen, sorry to keep you." He stopped. For 3 seconds, his entire body froze. His face drained of color before the mask snapped back into place. "Well," he said with a thin smile, "this is unexpected." "Good afternoon, Victor," Julian said, tone smooth as glass. "You remember Dr. Izzy Reyes, I assume?" Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. How could I forget?" Izzy's voice was calm, even. "Funny. You managed it for 2 years. He chuckled, taking the seat across from her. I see you've been busy, Julian. Recruiting ghosts? Izzy leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. You always did like pretending ghosts couldn't talk back. Victor spread his hands. This meeting was supposed to be about the merger, not ancient history. Then let's talk about history, Izzy said. Specifically, the history you rewrote. Julian slid a folder across the table. The documents you provided claim full proprietary ownership of 17 patents, all developed in-house under your supervision. That's correct, Victor said smoothly. Izzy opened her laptop. The screen glowed bright in the sterile room. Here's the code base for Athenia, the predictive model you filed 2 years ago. I recognize it because I wrote it. Down to the misplaced variable you once mocked me for leaving in draft form. Victor's composure faltered. You expect me to take your word? No, Izzy said, interrupting him. I expect you to recognize your own crime. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. See this line of code? Time-stamped from my personal cloud drive, 8 months before Quantum Bridge even existed. Metadata intact. Development log verified by Harvard's Innovation Archive. Victor forced a laugh. You could have fabricated that in an afternoon. Julian's voice cut through the air. We anticipated that. My legal team already validated the metadata chain. It checks out. Victor's gaze darted to Julian. You had my systems audited? I had my interests protected, Julian replied calmly. You sold me stolen work. That's fraud, Victor. Victor straightened, trying to reclaim dominance. This is absurd. She's a disgruntled ex-employee trying to sabotage a billion-dollar deal. Izzy's tone sharpened. And an ex-employee, I co-founded Quantum Bridge. My name was on the incorporation draft until you rewrote it. Julian slid another folder forward. We found the original contract, signed by both of you, witnessed, notarized. Victor's voice trembled with rage. That document was superseded by falsified amendments, Julian said quietly, filed 6 months after she disappeared. You changed the dates, the terms, even the witness signatures. Sloppy work for a man who prides himself on precision. The silence that followed was suffocating. The hum of the HVAC sounded like thunder. Izzy's voice broke through, soft but lethal. You once told me the world forgets women who lose. You were right, until someone reminds it. Victor slammed his hand on the table. You think this makes you a hero? You don't know what I sacrificed to build this company. I know exactly what you sacrificed, Izzy said. Me. The words landed like a blade. Julian leaned forward, eyes locked on Victor. You're done, Victor. I'm withdrawing the merger immediately, and I'll make sure every investor, every partner, every regulatory body sees this file. Victor's confidence cracked, his mask slipping entirely now. You'd destroy both our companies over this? I'd destroy 100 to protect the truth, Julian said. Victor turned to Izzy, voice dripping venom. You think this clears your name? You're naive. The world won't care. It never does. Izzy met his glare without flinching. Maybe not, but at least now the world will see your face next to mine. He laughed bitterly. Still the idealist. No, she said softly. Just done being silent. Julian slid his tablet across the glass. That's a recording of our last meeting. The one where you claimed your patents were clean and free from co-founder claims. Your words, time-stamped, legally archived. Victor stared at the screen like it was a detonator. You recorded me? Of course, Julian said. It's standard policy in high-value negotiations. You signed the consent form yourself. For the first time, Victor had no reply. His reflection trembled in the glass table, his composure dissolving with every second. Izzy closed her laptop. You told me once that control is about who speaks first, but the truth doesn't need a head start, Victor. It just needs a voice. Julian stood, gathering the folders. This meeting is over. Victor's voice cracked. You can't walk away from this deal. You'll regret it. Julian turned to the door. No, Victor, you will. Izzy rose slowly, steady and unbroken. She looked at the man who had built his empire from her ruin and smiled faintly. Goodbye, Victor. He didn't answer. He just sat there, surrounded by glass, art, and lies, as the two people he could no longer control walked out of his life. The door clicked shut behind them. For the first time in years, Izzy's reflection in the glass didn't look like a ghost. It looked like someone alive. The tension inside the conference room was thick enough to slice. The skyline of Boston glimmered through the glass walls, indifferent to the storm unfolding within. Victor was still standing, his breath shallow, his jaw locked. Across from him, Julian calmly closed the folder of documents, each movement deliberate, final. "The deal is over," Julian said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the unmistakable tone of authority, the kind that came from someone who didn't bluff. "I don't invest in theft, Victor, and I don't let anyone call her intellect an anonymous asset." Victor blinked, uncomprehending for a moment, as if the words couldn't possibly mean what they did. "You're throwing away $1 billion opportunity because of... what? Her story?" Julian met his gaze squarely. "Because of truth. And because I refuse to profit from another person's destruction." Izzy said nothing. She didn't need to. For the first time, silence was her ally. Victor turned toward her with a sneer. "Still hiding behind men, I see. You couldn't win alone, so you found yourself a savior." Izzy looked up, calm and steady. "No, I found a witness." Her words sliced through the air like glass shattering. Victor's composure cracked. "You're still delusional. You think this changes anything? I'll sue you both into oblivion. Defamation, interference, breach of contract. You'll drown in legal fees before you ever set foot in a courtroom." Julian leaned back in his chair, utterly unshaken. "Try it." Victor froze, thrown off by the calm in his tone. Julian gestured toward the tablet on the table. "Every conversation we've had since this merger began is archived. Every document you falsified, every amendment you modified, every metadata trail you thought you erased, we recovered it all. My legal team has already submitted a sealed copy to the Federal Compliance Office." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "You move 1 inch against her, and you won't be suing anyone. You'll be indicted." The color drained from Victor's face. Izzy watched him carefully. There was no satisfaction in her expression, only an eerie kind of stillness, the calm of someone who had finally stopped running. "You stole everything," she said quietly. "My work, my reputation, my voice. And when that wasn't enough, you took my silence too. You made me afraid of existing." Victor's lip curled. "Don't be melodramatic." "I'm being precise," Izzy replied. "You made me disappear, and for 2 years I let you. That ends today. You can't take anything from me anymore, because I have nothing left that you can steal." Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. "You built your empire on the assumption that no one would ever stand up to you. So here I am, standing." Victor's hands balled into fists. "You think you can destroy me with a few files and dramatics? The world doesn't care about right or wrong. It cares about perception. And I control perception." Julian stood slowly, the chair scraping softly against the marble floor. "Not anymore." He opened another file and placed a small drive on the table. "This is a copy of your original patent drafts, the ones with her name attached. Our legal department traced the editing history, Victor. Every change you made, every deletion, is documented. And here," he tapped the drive, "this is your recorded statement from last week, declaring the intellectual property chain clean." Victor lunged forward, but Julian's tone froze him mid-step. "That's enough." For the first time, Victor seemed smaller, not because he'd lost money or power, but because the illusion of invincibility had cracked. The arrogance that once filled every room he entered now looked like a desperate disguise. "You'll regret this," Victor hissed. Julian smiled faintly. "I doubt it." Izzy rose from her chair, slow and deliberate. "You were right about one thing," she said. "The world does remember perception, and now it's going to see yours." Victor turned away, trying to regain control. "You think anyone will believe you? You think the media will care?" Julian gathered the folders, his movements unhurried. "They won't have to believe us. They'll believe the evidence." Victor's voice wavered, teetering between fury and fear. "I'll call every journalist I know. I'll paint you both as opportunists. She's unstable, always has been. Everyone knows that." Julian closed the last folder with a soft click. "And yet," he said, "you signed a $1 billion merger with her algorithms." Victor's mouth opened, but no words came. Julian slipped the folders into his briefcase, as composed as if he'd just finished a routine meeting. "We're done here. The documents have already been filed. You'll be hearing from our lawyers, not from me." He turned toward the door. Izzy stayed seated, her gaze fixed on Victor. "Goodbye, Victor," she said softly. I hope someday you learn the difference between power and worth. He looked at her, face twisted in disbelief. You actually think you've won? Izzy stood. No, I think I finally stopped losing. She followed Julian to the door, her steps steady, her shoulders straight. Behind them, Victor shouted something, threats, curses, but the sound was muffled by the heavy glass once the door closed. Julian paused in the hallway, looking at her. You okay? Izzy nodded, exhaling slowly. I think so. He studied her face. You didn't just win a fight in there. You reclaimed your name. Izzy smiled faintly, her eyes bright. And you kept your promise. Julian's expression softened. Always. For the first time in years, Izzy didn't feel like prey. She felt seen, solid and free. Behind them, through the glass, Victor's reflection stood alone, diminished beneath the weight of his own empire. Morning light poured through the wide glass doors, spilling across polished tiles and the scent of salt air. Outside, the Atlantic shimmered like liquid glass, soft waves gliding toward the shore. Inside, Izzy Reyes was reading the newspaper, a cup of coffee cooling by her elbow. The headline ran across the front page in bold type. Victor Lau convicted, former tech mogul found guilty of fraud and intellectual property theft. Below it, a smaller subheading caught her eye, one that still didn't feel real even after seeing it for the 100th time. Isabella Reyes, the erased co-founder of Quantum Bridge, reclaims her name. She traced the letters with her fingertip, her lips curving into a quiet smile. Behind her, Julian's footsteps echoed across the open floor. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame, watching her. Still reading about him? He asked softly. Izzy folded the paper but didn't look up. I thought I'd stopped caring, she said, but seeing it in print, it feels like something finally closed. Julian walked over, his reflection merging with hers in the glass wall facing the sea. Closure looks good on you, he murmured, resting a hand on her shoulder. She glanced at him, half amused. You say that like it's an accessory. Maybe it is, he said. Hard-earned, expensive, and only suits people who fought for it. Izzy laughed quietly, shaking her head. You always did have a poetic way of saying, we survived. Julian smiled, stepping closer until his arms circled her waist. We didn't just survive, he said against her hair. We built something new. Her gaze drifted toward the far corner of the living space, where a sleek glass desk overlooked the water. A silver plaque sat on top. Reyes Analytics. The name gleamed in the sunlight. It still made her pause every time she looked at it. Her name. First. No longer hidden behind a hyphen, a co-title, or someone else's ego. Just hers. It feels strange, she admitted. Having a company again. Signing contracts with my name as CEO. I keep waiting for someone to tell me I don't belong there. Julian's voice was gentle. You earned it twice over, Izzy. Once when you built the technology, and again when you took it back. She turned to face him, the sunlight catching her eyes. Do you ever regret it? What? Walking away from the merger, from all that money, from the easy path. Julian considered for a moment, then smiled faintly. I traded a deal for peace. That's the best investment I've ever made. Izzy tilted her head. Peace, huh? Is that what you call the last 6 months of court hearings, sleepless nights, and angry shareholders? He laughed, the sound low and warm. Okay, maybe not peace, but purpose. That's worth more. Izzy leaned against the counter, folding her arms. Reyes Analytics, she said slowly, tasting the words. Do you realize? That's the first time I've built something with my name on the door. Julian nodded. And it won't be the last. She smiled, glancing toward the ocean. The first time I stood in front of a boardroom, I thought power meant being in control. Now I think it just means not being afraid anymore. He stepped behind her again, his arms finding their familiar place around her waist. And are you? He asked quietly. Izzy closed her eyes. The sunlight, the ocean breeze, the rhythmic sound of the waves, it all felt impossibly far from the cold glass walls of Quantum Bridge. No, she whispered, not anymore. Julian pressed a soft kiss to her temple. Good, because you're terrible at hiding. She laughed, turning in his arms. Says the man who spent months pretending he didn't care about the woman he rescued. Rescued? Julian arched an eyebrow. I'd say you did most of the rescuing. I just happened to show up with good timing. Convenient timing, she teased. Fate, he corrected. They stood there for a moment, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Outside, the ocean caught the light like molten silver, endless and calm. Izzy picked up the newspaper again and studied the photo of Victor leaving the courthouse. The once untouchable man now looked smaller, swallowed by the crowd. "I don't hate him," she said quietly. Julian looked at her, surprised. "You'd be justified if you did." "I used to," she admitted, "but hate kept me tied to him. Now I just want distance. I want to forget what it felt like to be defined by someone else's lies." Julian nodded slowly. "Then don't remember the lies. Remember how you proved them wrong." Izzy's smile was soft, reflective. "Do you ever think it's strange how something that destroyed me ended up leading me here?" Julian's eyes followed hers out to the ocean. "Sometimes destruction is just the long way to freedom." She leaned against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat grounding her. "That sounds like another one of your investor metaphors." "Maybe," he said, "but it's true." The smell of coffee lingered in the air. The sunlight shifted higher, filling every corner of the kitchen with warmth. Izzy glanced toward the desk again, where a new stack of design drafts awaited her attention. Her company, her future. "I should get to work," she said, reluctant but smiling. Julian released her slowly. "Go change the world. I'll make breakfast." "Deal," she said, grabbing her tablet. Then she paused at the doorway and looked back. "Julian?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for choosing to believe me." He smiled. "Thank you for giving me a reason to." Izzy turned toward the light, the morning unfolding like a promise. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was starting over. She felt like she'd finally arrived. The morning air in Miami was soft and bright, the kind that made even silence feel alive. Sunlight streamed through the wide glass doors, casting ripples of gold across the kitchen floor. 2 coffee cups sat half full on the counter, steam curling lazily upward. Izzy stood barefoot by the window, scrolling through messages from her new team, design proposals, client meetings, a full calendar that now bore her name at the top. For once, the weight on her shoulders felt like purpose, not punishment. Julian leaned against the counter, watching her with quiet amusement. "You realize it's Sunday, right? You're allowed to rest." She smiled without turning. "Resting feels unnatural." He chuckled. "You've built a company, cleared your name, and terrified half the financial world. I think you've earned a nap." Izzy finally faced him, her eyes glowing in the morning light. "If I stop moving, I'll start overthinking." Julian tilted his head. "Then let me give you something to think about." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and dropped to one knee. No preamble, no orchestrated music, just him, barefoot, in jeans with sunlight spilling over his face. Izzy froze. "Julian?" He looked up at her, steady and certain. "Don't panic. There's no audience, no photographer hiding in the pantry, just us." Her breath caught. "What are you doing?" He smiled faintly. "Something overdue." For a long moment, he said nothing. The quiet between them carried every word they had already spoken and everyone they'd been too afraid to. "When I met you," Julian began softly, "I was a man who measured worth in numbers. Profits, deals, margins. I thought success was proof of morality, that if the math worked, the world made sense." He paused, exhaling. "Then you walked into my life, and you broke every equation." Izzy's throat tightened. "Julian," he continued, his voice low but unwavering, "you reminded me that conscience isn't a liability, that integrity costs something, but it's worth paying for. You showed me what real courage looks like. And it wasn't in boardrooms or contracts. It was in a woman who lost everything and still refused to hate." Her eyes shimmered, but her smile trembled with disbelief. "You don't have to do this." "I know," he said gently. "That's why it matters." He opened a small velvet box. Inside, the ring wasn't extravagant, just simple gold, elegant, timeless. It caught the light like a quiet truth. "I'm not promising you fairy tales," Julian said. "No castles, no glass slippers, just mornings like this. 2 cups of coffee, 1 shared life, arguments, laughter, long nights, slow forgiveness. A future built on respect, not rescue." Izzy blinked away tears. "I told myself I'd never believe another promise from a man. I don't want you to believe it," he said. "I want you to choose it." The words settled deep. Inside her, steady, not grand. A promise that didn't ask her to surrender, but to stand beside. She took a long breath, looking down at him. You realize what you're signing up for, right? I'm stubborn. I don't listen. I'll probably rewrite your contracts out of habit. Julian laughed, a sound full of warmth. Good. Keeps me honest. She hesitated, her heart full and trembling. You really think we can build something real out of all this mess? He looked up, eyes gleaming. Izzy, everything real is born from a mess. That's how life proves it's alive. The sunlight shifted, touching the ring, the floor, the curve of her smile. Slowly she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Not because I need saving, because we both do. Julian rose, slipping the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for this morning. Izzy stared at it for a moment, then laughed softly. It's simple. So are the best things, he said. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. So, what now? Now? Julian's eyes softened. We start living like people who aren't afraid anymore. They stood there for a while, just breathing in the sunlight. No grand music, no applause, just the quiet certainty that this was what surviving was meant to feel like. Izzy leaned her forehead against his. What's our next project then? Julian grinned. A family? A company that doesn't compromise? Maybe a crash course in sign language so my mother can finally gossip with you properly. Izzy laughed, tears catching at the edges of her joy. And maybe, she added, a trip back to Paris. He raised an eyebrow. Paris? The city that broke your heart? The city that taught me I had one, she said softly. It feels right to start there again. Julian smiled. Then Paris it is. She looked down at the ring once more, the gold glinting in the sun, reflecting both of them. I used to think love was something that happened to you, she murmured. Now I think it's something you build. He kissed her forehead. Brick by brick then. She smiled, resting her head against his chest. Brick by brick. Outside, the sea stretched endless and blue, the horizon glowing like a promise written in light. Izzy Reyes wasn't a ghost anymore. She wasn't a survivor, or a headline, or a name reclaimed. She was simply a woman standing in her own story, alive, equal, and unafraid. And Julian Mercer, the man who had once measured life in profit margins, finally understood that the most valuable thing he'd ever gained couldn't be bought, signed, or traded. It was standing right there in front of him, barefoot, smiling, and holding his hand.